Hello everyone, I'm Mandy Lockley and welcome to On Purpose Astrology and Happy New Year to all of you. I hope 2024 brings you peace, prosperity, good health and a good old dollop of joy. And I hope whether or not you celebrated the festive season, I hope that period at the end of 2023 was one of fun, peacefulness, coming together with people. I hope it was lovely for all of you. January starts. I'm recording this on the 2nd of January, and it's an intense month to begin an intense year because there's a Capricorn focus, which I'll talk about shortly. And then I will talk about the big event of January 2024, which is that Pluto goes into Aquarius from Capricorn. We had a little taste of it last year, just for a couple of months, but it's going to spend pretty much all of 2024 in Aquarius, and by the end of 2024 it'll have settled into Aquarius for 21 long years. So I'm going to be talking quite a lot about that and what that means and what occurred and what we learned from Pluto in Capricorn, because Pluto is currently at the very intense 29 degrees, the last degree of Capricorn. First, before I do that, today, the 2nd of January, Mercury goes direct. So there's some good news for the new year, for the second day of the new year. For many of us, it's a back to work day. It's certainly a back to work day for me. I've had a good, nearly couple of weeks rest and break over the festive period. Mercury's been retrograde. So what is Mercury all about? Well, when it's retrograde, things can go a little bit haywire, a little bit backwards. Coming up for a review, coming up for being refreshed, coming up for being renewed when Mercury is retrograde. So the things that Mercury stands for is transport and short journeys, and we've certainly seen some transport disruption. For example, the Eurostar that goes between continental Europe and the UK and London was cancelled on the 31st of January while Mercury was having its last couple of days in retrograde because of flooding in the tunnel. Communication, all forms of communication also comes under Mercury, not just verbal communication, but bodily communication, and any sort of communication, even visual, online, writing, any form of communication comes under Mercury. So communication will start slowly to be getting more smoothly, less perhaps misunderstandings or getting our words wrong or saying the wrong thing. It's a back to work time, as I've said. So again, it's a good time to go back to work on the day that Mercury goes direct. Now, Mercury goes slow for a little while and it has to go back over the degrees of that it went back over. So we have that what's called the shadow of the retrograde. So it takes a little while. It is direct from today, but it's going to be going a little bit more slowly, and we might see a little bit of just sort of thinking back or a little bit of echoes of what happened while it was retrograde. It was retrograde for 2.5, 3 weeks. Other things that Mercury is symbolic of is school and education. Of course, it's a back to school week for many people. Mercury, in essence, is also about mindset, our mindset. Think about how we can adjust our mindset. Possibly there might have been some negativity in our mindset when Mercury went retrograde. Things weren't happening in the way they might have done. Things we wanted to get done, maybe we had contracts to sign or things to start, projects to start, couldn't quite get it off the ground. Now it's direct, it's good news. Ideas, opinion, thought processes. Again, we can think about our thoughts. How do our thoughts translate into what happened? Negative thinking. How can we think more positively? I mean, it's a good time to think positively. We're kind of trained to think positively in the new year to sort of can we improve? How can we improve the way we think about things? How can we improve what we do? So there's a Capricorn focus. Before I talk about Pluto going into Aquarius and the air focus that's going to be going for a long time, for many, many, many years, for the outer planet of Pluto, the air so-called mutation that we're in at the moment, which I'll explain what that is. as I go through this presentation. But first of all, we have a focus on the sign of Capricorn. So the sun is currently in Capricorn. It always is at this time of year until the 20th of January. The sun, as we know, is about our vitality, our identity, our sense of purpose. So it's a good sign for the start of the year because we want a renewed sense of purpose at the beginning of the year. New Year's resolutions, for example. Mars goes into Capricorn from the 5th of January. Mars is about our desires, how we act, what makes us angry, how we assert ourselves in positive ways, the courage that we can find to get things done that we need. You know, getting our needs met and our wants and our desires met is all about Mars. And Mars in Capricorn, it's strong in Capricorn because I'll talk about some of the issues, some of the themes of Capricorn, and you'll see that taking action, really practical, pragmatic action, and making a plan and being ambitious is very well sort of forecast for Mars in Capricorn, and it's in Capricorn Mars until the 13th of February. Mercury then goes into Capricorn direct. It's direct by then for a couple of weeks already. It goes into Capricorn on the 14th of January until the 5th of February because it's quite a fast moving planet. And again, all those things I've mentioned, Mercury, our mindset, etc. Then on the 23rd of January, a couple of days after Pluto leaves Capricorn, Venus goes into Capricorn. So that's about relationships, our values, our personal assets, and how we collaborate and get along with other people. So what are the themes for Capricorn? So there's a real focus on Capricorn, isn't there then, until sort of we get later into the month and things get a little bit more Aquarian, certainly with the sun and with Pluto. Well, the themes of Capricorn, think about goat. Capricorn is symbolized by the goat, the mountain goat, or the sea goat, if you will, but more generally the mountain goat because it's an earth sign. It's the long climb, isn't it? Carries on up and up and up and the moment. The sure-footed, grounded goat. So this period of time with that Capricorn focus, it's a time for developing perhaps some of the, we can consciously try and develop some of the positive qualities of Capricorn, which are tenacity, discipline. It's a Saturn ruled sign. Saturn is all about discipline, resourcefulness. It's an earth sign. It's very resourceful. Capricorn is also about gaining wisdom through experience. It's not bookish wisdom, it's wisdom through going through an experience and maybe going through sort of physical, practical experiences or even emotional experiences. Of course, we're all emotional animals. It's a cautious sign. So we can perhaps think about cautious optimism for the future as we set our ambitions, our goals, our strategy and our vision for the year to come. Caution is a thing for Capricorn. Capricorns can sometimes become too cautious, so that's why I said sort of practical caution, not sort of fear caution, because ruled by Saturn, Capricorn does tend to represent some of the obstacles that we have to go through, some of the things we have to learn, tests and lessons, which is where that tenacity, discipline, resourcefulness and wisdom, learning from things that happen and doing it better and then being an example to others. Now, in terms of how that affects your chart personally, you can see on your chart visually, you can look onto your own chart and see what house Capricorn falls into. And if you don't have your chart, you can find it on astro.com. You can download a free chart also on alave.com and you can see which of the houses has Capricorn, the symbol of Capricorn on the house. And you can see that is the area of life that is symbolized by the sign of Capricorn. You might also have planets or even angles such as your ascendant or your midheaven, etc., on a degree of Capricorn. So again, you can look and you can see if you've got any planets or angles in Capricorn, and you'll see then you will at some point have a transit, i.e. these planets that are in Capricorn, this Capricorn emphasis, you will see where they meet some of your own planets and points in your own chart. And again, these themes I've talked about, these Capricornian themes, will be things to think about, to try and use the energies, the planets. It's easy It's easy language to say, oh, Saturn's doing this to me. I don't know, Mars is doing that to me. Mercury's doing the other to me. Oh, Mercury in retrograde has done this to me over the period it's been retrograde, etc., etc. The planets don't do anything; they reflect. It's that as above, so below. So that gives us the opportunity to use the energies in the best way possible. Excuse me, I'm going a bit croaky. Mercury's going direct. Hello, Mercury. Thank you very much. A little bit croaky. Anyway, we can use the opportunity of the themes of the astrology that's in the air at the moment, that's making points to our chart, making connections to our birth chart, such as I said, these fantastic good qualities of Capricorn, that tenacity, discipline. I'm not going to repeat that again because I'll have repeated it a third time, which is very Mercury retrograde. And because Mercury retrograde does kind of repeat things because it's going backwards, we can look forward now into the future. Then we can also avoid the things that, we can work consciously to try and avoid being the worst of the sign, because all the signs have, on a spectrum of the at best and at worst. So for some people say that Capricorn can be the ends justify the means. And when I talk about Pluto in Capricorn, the end of Pluto in Capricorn, shortly, you'll see how the ends justify the means potentially in people who are of the ruling classes, whether that's in big business and corporations or whether it's in politics. So you can avoid that. You can do things with wisdom. You can do things in integrity, in a way that brings integrity to the way you conduct yourself. The other thing about Capricorn, because it's ruled by Saturn, I already talked about caution. So not doing things out of fear or overcoming fear. And you can use the strength of Mars in Capricorn to help you with that. It's a really good sign for Mars, as I said, and that's from the 5th of January, Mars in Capricorn, until the 13th of February. So you've got a good month to use that Mars in Capricorn energy if you'd like to. So that's on the personal level. So what about on the mundane level? When I talk about the mundane level, I'm talking about mundane astrology, the astrology of world astrology, world events, politics, the weather, all the things that happen that affect us collaboratively, and we're affected obviously by world events in some ways, some of us more than others. These are themes to look out for in the next 3 weeks before Pluto goes into Aquarius, and the Sun also goes into Aquarius, actually within a day of Pluto going into Aquarius, the Sun and Pluto going to Aquarius conjunct, which is very interesting. Mundane. So here are some themes that we might like to look out for if we follow the news. So Capricorn is cardinal Earth. It's about material and practical matters because it's a cardinal sign, Capricorn. It's about new starts, initiating things, new plans, new projects. We might have new plans or projects coming through when, with all this Capricornian focus. It's about the Earth. Of course, it's an Earth sign, so it's about the Earth itself and the Earth, specifically the Earth's resources and how we use them. Capricorn, there are they seem a bit old-fashioned now, but when I was first learning astrology, there are little phrases that go with all the signs, and I use was a phrase that went with Capricorn. I use, or we use, how do we use our resources as a world and also us personally? So we can think about that as well. How do we use the things that are available to us, all the things, the practical things, the material things, the relationships? How do we use them? Do we use them responsibly or not? So those are things. Are we using the resources that we have as a society and as individuals? Are we using them responsibly? Questions to ask and to think about. Capricorn's about physical structures, such as buildings, for example. It's also about social structures and hierarchies. The social order is questioned and challenged under Capricorn, and we've seen questions about the social order and hierarchies while Pluto was in Capricorn. I'll be saying a lot more about that soon. It's also about the property markets, Capricorn, buildings, as I've said, and our financial system generally, or the financial systems that support the use of land or building or construction. It's about aging, getting older as well. So how do we treat our aging populations, and what are the challenges of an ever increasing aging population as longevity gets longer? We're living longer, and under Pluto in Aquarius, we probably will be living even a lot longer. I wouldn't be surprised if most of us, good health, you know, so long as we can stay in good health and look after ourselves, can easily reach more than 100 years old. It's very interesting. I think that's going to be definitely a thing in Pluto in Aquarius. Control and order. How does the government and the rulers in general, how do they impose control and order? That's another thing for Capricorn on a mundane level. Now, Aquarius, Pluto in Aquarius. We can't really talk about Pluto in Aquarius until we talk about the fact that Pluto is at 29 degrees of Capricorn at the moment until the 21st. So it's had more than a month. It'll have more than a month at the 29th degree, which is the last degree of any planet that you see at 29 degrees. It's in the last degree of its sign. It's known technically as the anaretic degree. And this is where you have a real pressure point, because there seems to be an urgency. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to see. There's a lot to get done, and things become very obvious about what's gone wrong and what needs to be done before that planet can move into a new sign. So it's quite intense. It feels quite pressured at the anaretic degree, which is why I'm dedicating a little bit of time in this talk to talk about what has happened during Pluto in Capricorn, because that sets the scene really for Pluto in Aquarius. So let's have a look. Let's have a little historical review. Pluto was in Capricorn 2008 to 2024. Well, immediately we had the credit crunch, which led to the banking crash, which led to recession in many countries, which led to austerity measures in other countries, in many countries, including the UK, where I'm based. Pragmatism with Pluto and Capricorn. Collectively, there was pragmatism. Capricorn, I've already talked about pragmatism for Capricorn. Followed the idealism of Pluto in Sagittarius that preceded it. There was retraction, recession, example, after the growth, you know, the sort of the fast, almost seemingly unlimited growth that came with Pluto in Sagittarius, which comes before Capricorn, of course. So we were told to do the Capricornian thing and work harder, get on with it, do your bit, don't complain, and don't protest. There was a widening of the wealth gap during Pluto in Capricorn. So that's really interesting. The widening of the wealth gap during Pluto in Capricorn, that's been a really marked thing. Now, Pluto has an orbit of more than 200 years. So the last time that Pluto was in Capricorn was in the 18th century. Towards the end of it came out of it towards the end of the 18th century, 17 something or other. Sorry, I don't know the dates off the top of my head, but over 200 years ago, just over 200 years ago, Pluto was in Capricorn. And by the end of Pluto in Capricorn in the 18th century, we also saw a widening of the wealth gap. Isn't that interesting? That's a recurring theme. There was a widening of the wealth gap. And when Pluto went into Aquarius in that 18th century period, there was, by the end of Pluto in Aquarius, that wealth gap shortened. Pluto in Aquarius. Aquarius is about the common people. It's about equality. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But what happened in the end days of Pluto in Capricorn in the 18th century was that there was the seeding. It took many, many, many years for it to come to total fruition to where we are today, of course. The seeding of the capitalism, which is our economic system, which is in most of the world, it's our current economic system, capitalism. At the time in the late 18th century, it was the mercantile system. And academics and economists at that time believed it needed to change because there was no trickle down. You know, all the wealth was held by a very few, vast wealth held by very few, and then there were lots of very, very poor people, and there was no trickle down. So capitalism came through as an ideology in part to help to widen that wealth gap. So you had that trickle down. So you had business, you had the rise of the middle classes and the business people who were able to employ people, and then people eventually were able to earn more and have a decent cost of living, a decent standard of living over, as I said, over many, many years. But that seed was planted at the end of Pluto in Capricorn, because Pluto in Capricorn then in the 17th, the 18th century showed us, because that's what Pluto does, shows us what's wrong, and we might things that we might not have otherwise seen. It brings things to the surface, things that are buried, we can't see it. It brings to the surface to be cleansed, to be healed, to give us power, to empower us to make radical and very big changes. But it's a seed. Pluto is has a long orbit, and it takes a long time in process. Although it's interesting when I said that, you know, we had the credit crunch, the banking crash, the recession, authority, and very quickly Pluto into Capricorn, so that boom, you know, it was the urgency that had to happen at the end of Pluto in Sagittarius that had run its course, and it was urgent that things were going to have to, and Pluto's process wasn't easy. It does cause pain. To go back to Pluto in Capricorn in the 21st century, we saw the scapegoating of the vulnerable and powerless more and more. Certainly when governments introduced austerity measures, so they cut back on welfare, they cut back on the National Health Service, they cut back on, you know, all sorts of social services as well. So it made it harder for children to get into the schools they wanted to get into, made it harder to find a doctor's appointment. But the government and sectors of the media, certainly in the UK, blamed the common people, really. And when Pluto goes into Aquarius, the common people are going to want to have a voice. They're going to want to have equality. So the common people I'm speaking, there's always somebody vulnerable that can't sort of fight back, who doesn't have power. So Pluto and Capricorn's power was about blaming the powerless, and to some extent, you might disagree, but from my point of view, it seemed like there was a lot of blaming the powerless. A lot of that was people who were sick or disabled or on benefits, on welfare, or immigrants and migrants they were blamed for the fact that there wasn't enough money to support social services, whereas really it was a government's decisions to cut these services, and then to not bring them back up to speed when the demand became higher. And remember, for example, we had a lot of, during this time, we had a lot of migration to the UK from EU citizens who came from other countries, who set up businesses, who did jobs, and many of them are still here, of course, and made their home, made their lives here, who were paying taxes and contributing to the economy. But they were, and then in the UK, as you probably know, we had in 2016, we had the Brexit vote, and the Brexit vote won. We voted as a country, not me personally, but we voted as a country just marginally to leave the European Union. So that's another big change, and it was about taking back control. That was what people were told would happen when we left the UK, left the EU. We'd be able to take back control. It hasn't quite worked out like that, but it's a very much Pluto and Capricorn thing, taking control. The Arab Spring, we had that. Remember 2011, governments were overthrown. That's another Pluto sort of revolutionary thing that happened. Law and order was tightened. Pluto in Capricorn. Capricorn is also about law and social order. Land and resources. Remember I talked about Capricorn being about land and resources. There was a grab by the powerful. Pluto is the powerful, control through fear. Again, Capricorn control, and the Saturnian feeling of fear. Big Brother is watching you. You're being watched everywhere you go. Boundaries. Capricorn is about boundaries, strengthened and enforced. Country boundaries, strengthened and enforced. As I said already, the UK leaving the EU was so we could control our own borders. Ironically, we have higher migration into the UK than we ever had when we were in the EU, apparently, depending on how you crunch the numbers. Remember Trump and his wall to stop people coming from Central and Southern America into the USA. We saw the exposure of tyrants, plutocrats, corrupt leaders and businesses. Interestingly, the term the dark web was coined in 2009. Political move to the right generally across the board, and Extinction Rebellion just stopped oil, so protest groups came up, the global pandemic, and then of course the cost of living crisis. So now we have Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto goes into Aquarius on the 21st of January 2024. You can see it there circled at the bottom of the chart there, conjunct the sun. So Pluto lives in the dark. Pluto is Hades. It's the god of the underworld. It's a thing that we can't see, but it goes into Aquarius conjunct the sun. So it shows a light. It shines a light on all things plutonian, power, empowerment, secrets, taboos. Has a lot to do with shame, actually. What are we ashamed of as communities, as individuals? You know, what are or should those in power, or those that hold power in any walk of life, where is the secrets? Where is the shame? There's shining a light there. And when a planet, an outer planet, for example, like Pluto, goes into its new sign, a new sign, anything that it's in conjunct with sort of sets the scene. So a light is going to be shone on everything to do with Pluto in Aquarius. And we'll go into what those themes are in great detail, but just remember that. Now, Pluto in Aquarius, some ideas and opportunities. I'm going to read all of this out, and you can always pause and read it for yourself. I don't normally do really wordy slides on a YouTube film, but on a YouTube video. But there's quite a lot here, so I thought it's quite interesting to just have it written down. And this is actually from a presentation that I did to a group, and I think I did the same presentation to a school as well about Pluto in Aquarius. So here's some ideas for Pluto in Aquarius that we might like to consider. These are more mundane ideas. You know, we're talking about mundane astrology, things that might be happening in the world that will affect us or may affect us to some degree or other. Democracy, Aquarius. Aquarius is a sign of democracy. So there'll be a transformation of democracy, potentially, or maybe efforts to destroy democracy. Already in the UK, are we really a democratic country as if we have a monarchy and an unelected House of Lords where the laws go through them? Other countries will have the same questions. Are we really a democracy? Demands for civil rights, equality, and freedom of speech. People power. Aquarius is the planet of the common people. People like you and me. I don't know, maybe you're of the elite watching this, but I doubt it. People power. The common people, Aquarius. Protest. Civil unrest, societal breakdown, worst case scenario. Again, worst case scenario, governments doubling down on protests and free speech, and the rise of cancel culture. We've seen a lot of that cancel culture. You say something that doesn't fit with the paradigm, the current paradigm, then you can easily be cancelled. Even things you might have said 20 years ago when maybe ideas were different and what was tolerated in terms of language and speech was different. The shadow side of protest movements that call for equality and freedom. Don't forget that Pluto gives us opportunities for growth, for empowerment, for transformation, for using power responsibly. It also shows us the shadow side of the sign that it's in. So the shadow side of any of these things, really, but the shadow side of protest movements that call for equality and freedom. We might see a lot of that. We might see things at the heart of these protest movements. We might see them being exposed for perhaps not being quite as equitable as they appear to be on the surface. What's on the surface, what's underneath is what's Pluto, and what is symbolized by Pluto, and then what comes up. You know, it's the crap that comes up, it's the sewage, it's the sticky, smelly, horrible stuff, it's the dark stuff that we don't actually want to see, which is why it's associated with shame, with taboo. environmental catastrophe and mass displacement. Yes, we're going to see a lot more about the climate crisis, but Pluto in Aquarius, it's all about technological transformation, technological empowerment. So we could see radical technological solutions to the climate crisis. Transformational, it's a very good Pluto word, invention and innovation. Invention and innovation is another thing that is symbolized by Aquarius. Innovation and invention, unleashing immense power, Pluto, with unintended consequences for good or for bad. The next industrial revolution isn't on Earth. Yes, you heard it here. There's actually businesses, there's at least one in the UK, I'm sure there's others in other places of the world that are working on doing manufacturing in space, literally manufacturing things like satellites, alloys, pharmaceuticals in space. I'll be talking shortly about we're going through the air mutation. I'll explain what that is, of course, an air mutation which is going to last. We've just gone into it in 2020 and it's going to last for over 200 years. It was the last, this air mutation was preceded by the Earth mutation, which had manufacturing on Earth using the Earth's resources, which was the Industrial Revolution, for example. And now we're having the technological and the space revolution. Already we're seeing spaceships every other day. Well, I'm exaggerating a little bit. We're seeing more and more space travel happening, commercial space travel at that, which is really, you're going to see a lot more of that. A reinvention of what it means to be human. As I say, it's a sign of humanity, humans, people, Aquarius. So we're going to have a reinvention, a transformation of what it means to be human, artificial intelligence, transhumanism, longer lifespans. I've already mentioned that the technology and medical science, longer lifespans, and how are we going to deal with aging populations, gender as well, what it means to have a gender. When a planet like Pluto moves signs, you start to see the threads coming through. Maybe even a few years, not even a few months, but a few years, 2, 3, 4 years before that planet moves into its next sign. And there's been a lot of news about gender assignment, gender reassignment, about gender identity. That's going to become more normalized. There's been lots of confusion and there's been lots of pushback against it, but it's going to become more normalized, I think, during Pluto in Aquarius, that we can choose, that we have the right to choose what gender we want to be or want to identify as, or whether we don't want to be a gender at all. There is something kind of gender neutral actually about Pluto, Pluto, not Pluto, but about Aquarius in general. There is something sort of, we're all human, no matter the physiology that we were born with. Another thing I think is, what is consciousness? Maybe we'll solve the mystery. I don't know about you, but even when I was a young teenager, I'd lie in bed at night and thinking, who am I? And what is this voice in my head that has ideas and talks to me? And why am I seeing everything from my perspective? I still don't fully understand it, even though I work with consciousness. I'm an energy worker. I'm also a psychic medium and an astrologer and a Reiki master. So I work with consciousness, I work with energy, but what is it? Maybe the mystery will be solved. Going back really to mysteries as well, talking about space, there's going to be so much more we're going to learn about our universe. We've got the James Webb telescope that's sending back the most gorgeous pictures, but also making us question how planets and stars and solar systems and galaxies are formed. Where did it all start? It's just absolutely incredible. There's so much to look forward to. A growing knowledge industry as well, radical changes in the prevailing economic system. Slow process, I think, but I think it will happen. I think by the time we get to the end of Pluto in Aquarius, which is a good 21 years away, we'll have some idea. We might not be there, but we'll have some idea of the way things have gone, the way things will be going in the future. I talked about the last time Pluto was in Aquarius, it started moving towards a more democratic system of capitalism, and now that seems to have run its course. Certainly those in power, the end game of Pluto in Capricorn is those in power want to keep the system as it is because it benefits them. Pluto in Aquarius will have other ideas and will start that process. So universal basic income, we might have heard about there's been tests and experiments in various places in the world over the last few years. That probably will see more of that. We may even see over the next 20 odd years that might even be a thing in some countries. Now, very, very, very quietly, there has been, a few months ago, there was announced a very tiny experiment. I think it was about 30 people were randomly selected in two different parts of the UK, England, I think it was, to have a universal basic income for a year to see how the experiment worked, how their lives changed. Did they continue to work or not? Did they set up businesses? Did they become entrepreneurs? Did they sit at home, watch TV? What did they do with the money? And it's very quiet. I don't hear anything about it, really. It wasn't even announced as a big thing. It was in the corner of the news, but that's going to become more of a thing, particularly in the sense of we have a cost of living crisis as well, and hopefully there'll be more equality and more choice in terms of what we do with our money and where we spend our money, more community based structures, more kind of community banks and things that we can do as communities to support each other collaboratively. That's very Aquarius. Aquarius is about the group. It's about the group and how the group works, and the group working democratically, not on a top down, more democratically across the board. So we should see some of that. Challenges for monarchies. The relevance of hereditary power and titles will be questioned. That is already happening. Pluto goes into Aquarius in 3 weeks, and this week the government of the UK, for example, which has a head of state, has a monarch as a head of state, which is quite rare these days. There aren't that many countries in the world that have countries that do have monarchies, but not so much entwined with society as much power as our monarchy has. But already in the UK, they have announced that they're going to be doing a questionnaire for, I think, about several 100,000 people. I think it might be 175,000 people or than 750,000 people. Quite a lot of people are going to be asked on their views on the monarchy, and people are already thinking, well, the monarchy does need to change in the UK. It needs to be reformed. Reform Aquarius. Again, social reform. We're going to be demanding social reform collectively. The common people are going to be demanding social reform. Whether those benefit the collective but cause individual suffering is to be seen. Restructuring the structures exposed as corrupt under Pluto in Capricorn. Let's hope. Advocating for equality for those scapegoated under Pluto in Capricorn. Let's hope. And also radical changes that we can't yet predict. So there's a lot there, and there's a lot more, and you could dedicate a whole day to talking about Pluto in Aquarius. But I want to talk about the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. What's interesting is that the Jupiter and Saturn cycle is very important in mundane astrology. It's the basis of mundane astrology, the way the planets Jupiter and Saturn work out their cycle. And this is relevant, very relevant, as you'll see, to Pluto going into Aquarius, as I tell you what that means. But first of all, let's see what Jupiter in Saturn cycle stands for. This is a quote from Mundane Astrology, a really interesting book, Bayesian, Cambion and Harvey. If you are interested in mundane astrology, it's a really good textbook full of technical information. It's brilliant. This is a quote about the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, that the Jupiter-Saturn cycle is part of the process of working out the idea, Jupiter, of structured, purposeful and responsible social growth, Saturn, of giving substance, Jupiter, to possibilities and potentialities. So that's great, isn't it? So as Pluto goes into Aquarius, it triggers the start of the current Jupiter-Saturn cycle, which was in December 2020 at 0 degree of Aquarius, where obviously Pluto goes into Aquarius as well. So if there's a major conjunction, a major aspect of a major cycle, such as Jupiter-Saturn cycle, and then another outer planet ingresses, goes into their new sign, or hits the degree of this cycle, this other cycle that happened before it, and in this case, the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. It triggers all the themes. So all the themes of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, the current Jupiter-Saturn cycle, are being triggered by Pluto going into Aquarius, and intensified and empowered. So this is good news, because what we can be empowered to do as a society is think of the idea. What are our ideas and our hopes for structured, powerful, and responsible social growth? For giving substance to possibilities and potentialities. What is the best possible? What's the best potential? How can we take that idea and structure it purposefully and responsibly to give social growth to everyone, including the common man, the common people, the common woman, everyone, to make society fairer and more equitable and humanitarian as well. So this is the best we can hope for, really, for Jupiter and Saturn cycle. But for Pluto going into Aquarius, that there's a potential for that empowerment, for this positive, positive sort of working out of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. It says at the end of this quote, rather than as a conflict between expansion and contraction, optimism and pessimism. So we want to avoid the conflict of like right and wrong, good and bad, this growth and contraction, which growth and contraction, cycles of growth and contraction, of course, have been a hallmark of our current economic cycle, economic system. The capitalism is kind of, we have growth, and we have contraction, we have recession, and then we have expansion. There's loads of money, then suddenly there's no money, and that's part of the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. But we want to, Pluto in Aquarius, I hope we can harness the power and harness the ambition of making that stop, so that it's fairer and more equitable for everyone. So I want to just chat about what the Jupiter and Saturn cycle means. I think let's have a look at, no, I didn't put that slide in that explains it, but I can explain it verbally. So basically, the Jupiter-Saturn cycle is a cycle of 20 years. So the current cycle, as I've already said, started at 0 of Aquarius in December 2020. So there's 17 years left of that cycle. However, that's not the whole picture. The Jupiter-Saturn mutation cycle lasts over 200 years, about 250 years, give or take. That means when you're in a mutation cycle, each mutation cycle means that every one of the conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn over every 20 years will be in a certain element. So in December 2020, we had the start of every Jupiter-Saturn conjunction for the next 200 plus years is going to be in the air signs. In the air signs. So there we go. The signs of air. Aquarius, of course, is an air sign, then Gemini and Libra. So for the next 200 years, every 20 years, whenever we have a Jupiter and Saturn's conjunction, which is the start of a new cycle, it will be in Aquarius, Gemini, or Libra. Now, this is important because the element has a lot to say about what happens in the world. So the 200 plus years previous were in the earth signs. So we had the Industrial Revolution. We had the mining of the earth for fossil fuels. Can you see those strong themes? So now we're going into the air cycle. Let's learn a little bit more about that, because as I say, I've been banging on about this, and other astrologers are banging on about it, that we really can't look at this Pluto in Aquarius without looking at this Jupiter-Saturn cycle, because it just takes us really properly into the air mutation. As I say, which will outlive us all, and the way the world will be a different place by the end of it. It's already a different place. We've already been moving. So the mutation completed the transition to air in 2020 with, as I said, that Aquarius conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. It was a 40-year transition period. So the transition period started in 1980. So it's been a 40-year transition period from Earth to air. What happened with that was in 1980, there was a conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn in the air sign of Libra. Then it went back into Earth for one last time. And in 2000 and then 2020, it finally settled in the air signs. And that 40 years, think back, if you're old enough, think back over the last 40 years, how we have experienced accelerated change on every level as ideas became reality more and more quickly. Do you remember that's about ideas becoming reality is the focus. It's the you know, it's what that Jupiter-Saturn cycle is all about, ideas becoming reality. But it's been happening more and more quickly during this transition period, a period of sometimes sort of chaos, but also totally driven by technology, consumerism, capitalist growth philosophy, human invention and curiosity. Can you see the Aquarian themes coming through there? Technology, human invention and curiosity, climate change as well now. So as we go into the air mutation, we see what the Earth mutation has done to the Earth. Well, I go back to what I said earlier. Planets don't make anything happen. They just reflect what happens on Earth, and we can make the best of it or we can make the worst of it. And usually it's a combination of the two. But you can see climate change is now undeniable and accelerating. I mean, the weather, none of us have, it's not gone unnoticed how the weather is changing and the seasons are changing and it's getting colder and some places are getting hotter in other places, mostly hotter. It's getting wetter, it's getting windier, for example. The unsustainability of fossil fuels and the move to sustainables such as wind and solar power. This is what we need to do. We need to find new technology, new sustainable technology. Wind and solar power. Wind, we're in the air, we're looking to the air, we're looking to space, aren't we? Unsustainability of fossil fuels. And you can see, actually, it's funny, isn't it? Because as we are now at the end of the Earth mutation of the last 200 odd, the 200 years, odd years before 2020, you can see how those who benefit from fossil fuels in terms of the money that they make and the resources that they have in their countries, the access to fossil fuels that make those countries and the leaders of those countries and the big business people in those countries very wealthy, are trying to really resist the move away from fossil fuels. And of course, it's inconvenient for all of us as well, isn't it? It's very inconvenient for us to suddenly think we can't fill our car with oil or gas, you might call it, and that kind of thing. Gas boilers, we're all being asked to replace our gas boilers, but for most of us, it's not easy because the technology isn't quite there yet, I believe, and it's also very expensive. So it's inconvenient for all of us and most of us, but certainly those who benefit most from fossil fuels are going to be pushing back even more. We need to do something. Can technology save us? Pluto in Aquarius, technology, can that claim us? There's been mass movements against an awareness of raising of climate change, both within the establishment and outside of it. We've got Greta Thunberg, I've spelled her name great there, but anyway, Greta Thunberg, her school strikes, Extinction Rebellion, David Attenborough, who's TV gold, a legend in the UK and part of the establishment really, who's always ends his nature programs now, his natural history programs, with talk about how the climate is changing and how wildlife is changing. The new genre of popular science has become very popular, just stop oil the protests as well. So the conjunctions, 0 Aquarius, the conjunctions I've talked about in 2020 that are being triggered now this year in January 2024 of Jupiter and Saturn, and then the 0 Aquarius conjunction of Pluto with the Sun in Aquarius, now happening in 3 weeks, suggests the seeding of new ideas, the seeding of a new paradigm. Because conjunctions are all about seedings, just like it's a bit like a new moon, really. It's all seeding time. So, what are these new paradigms? Well, we can hope for reforms, democracy, real democracy, renewed concern for the common people, for fairness, for egalitarianism. That's another good word for Aquarius. Protests, humanitarian and environmental movements will be seeing those, even as governments are doubling down on trying to restrict the right to protest in many countries, including in the UK. Calls for social injustices to be righted. But Aquarius can be too intellectual, too impersonal, too unempathetic. So that's something we also need to be wary of, to be aware of, really, and to be cautious of, and to remember we still have Neptune in Pisces, which is all about empathy and compassion. So we can use that humanitarianism in that comes with Aquarius in a more empathetic way. Future technologies, further technological advances that we can't even imagine. I mean, I think there are big tech companies out there doing all sorts of amazing things that we don't even know about what they're doing. And we are kind of letting technology rule our lives to be a certain extent. And I think that will certainly carry on. It's going to be a really interesting year. Thank you very much for watching. I was watching a news program the other night, last night actually, and it said that there's going to be a big year for elections, changes of government. In the UK, we're going to have a general election, and it's widely thought that the incumbent Conservative Party will lose power. In America, it's going to be incredibly interesting because there's a presidential election in November, and Donald Trump is currently, even though he hasn't yet won the Republican nomination, he's widely expected to be the nomination for his presidential nomination for the US, for the Republicans, and in which case there's a strong possibility he could be the president of the US again, which would be very interesting, even as he's up on all sorts of charges, criminal charges as well. So that's really interesting. And other countries as well where elections are coming up. So if you do follow politics, if you do follow the news, I know it's not very spiritual to do so, but I think it's really interesting as an astrologer. If you're interested in astrology, it's just to take, even if it's just a detached view on the news. You know, Aquarius is very good at detachment and kind of watch it and think about it more intellectually without getting too upset or angry, but trying to do something about it if you can. Hopefully, I've been able to put some positive energy out there for you for the new year. There are some fantastic opportunities, both personally and collectively. And I think everything that we do personally, even if, you know, to make the world a better place for ourselves and for those around us and our communities, anything that we do personally does have a ripple effect. And I'm wishing you all the very, very best for 2024. See my website onpurposeastrology.com. I am currently taking bookings for personal private clients. If you want to know what 2024 has in store for you, your so-called astrological weather forecast for 2024, do get in touch via my website and have a look at some of my offerings for private consultations. Love you all. Thanks to all your subscribers. Please subscribe if you haven't. Lots of love as always. Thank you. Bye bye.